Up to this point, the Fantastic Four's cast of adversaries ranged from gangsters, aliens, and criminal masterminds like Doctor Doom. But in 1966, Jack Kirby and Stan Lee brought their heroes face to face with the cosmic horror of Galactus, a mythical figure beyond good and evil. Over 3 issues, the team will face off against a godlike enemy and find unexpected help in the Watcher and the Silver Surfer, in a story hailed as the indisputable pinnacle of the Silver Age of comic books. Today on Truth, Beauty, Comics. Welcome to Truth, Beauty, Comics. I'm Levi, a cartoonist.
And I'm Felix, a guy who likes comics.
And this is the podcast where we look for transcendence in a pulpy medium. Today we'll be talking about the Galactus Trilogy, issues 48 through 50 of Stan Lee and Jack Kirby's iconic Fantastic Four. And I think you mentioned, Felix, that this was your first time reading this issue, and it certainly was for me. Although, I will say I've seen parts of this issue, like if you grew up reading Marvel comics, you see like flashbacks to this very often, I feel like. But it was interesting reading it for the first time. How about you?
Flashbacks and then posters of the second issue with the If This Be Doomsday. And yeah, it is sort of iconic. And then I want to say the first superhero movie I ever saw in theaters. I wouldn't swear to it, but I think might have been Tim Story's Fantastic Four 2, Rise of the Silver Surfer.
Oh, really?
Which has many faults, but what year would that have come out?
It's like in the mid 2000s to me.
Yeah, it was 2007. So I would have been like 14, 15. Okay. So it was really cool at the time. So any critical distance is a bit impossible for me with that movie. I just have an affection for it that it doesn't quite deserve. So it was
an interesting time for superhero movies, I think. Yeah, that movie doesn't get a lot of. I mean, I do think that, obviously, it seems like the new Fantastic Four movie is going to be featuring Galactus, and probably this whole story will serve as inspiration for the new movie. And it seems like this is. It's either Doctor Doom or Galactus, or kind of the two villains that whenever they try to adapt the Fantastic Four, they kind of go to one of those two with pretty mixed results. I think there has yet to be a classic Fantastic Four movie, although maybe I'm underplaying the Tim Story films because I've never seen those. So
they're fun. They're worth a watch. I think that they struggle to find tone because in some ways they lean into kind of Silver Age comic booky stuff really well. Right. I love, for instance, how practical the Thing is in them. But and there's some sort of silly comedy that feels very Silver Agey with Mr. Fantastic, but then they also kind of want to have some drama, and I don't know how well. It's been years since I watched them, but I don't know if they entirely hold together. But they are fun. I think they're worth a watch. Yeah, I'm really intrigued. As we're recording this, we have yet to see the movie because it's a few months out from the new Fantastic Four movie, because it's a few months out from release. I'm intrigued by it because I really, really like the first 7 or 8 episodes of WandaVision, and it's the same director, Matt Shakman.
Interesting.
And he seems to do really well with historical stuff. And I also really like the first Captain America. I think it's the Winter Soldier is so tight that people sort of praise that and often will kind of poo-poo the first one a bit. I think the first one is great fun. And I'm hoping that this new one, because it's set in the 60s, has a bit of that vibe. Additionally, as I understand, from piecing together what leaks I've seen, it does seem like it's sort of going to be something of a combination between the Galactus Trilogy and then the Jonathan Hickman run, which I really like on Fantastic Four. And so I think it has promise, but also Marvel has just struggled so mightily to do things even competently since Endgame. That I can't place too much of it. For me, I really enjoy the 2 post-Endgame Spider-Man movies. I think Guardians 3 is excellent. And then some of the TV shows I like a lot, but in terms of the films, that's really it that I think are really good. You know,
Yeah.
everything after that, like a few of them I would rewatch. Um, you know, but and it's funny too, like Black Panther. Sorry, we're getting a bit away from Fantastic Four, but we have a lot to talk about. But like Black Panther 2 was actually a pretty good movie, but I have no desire whatsoever to rewatch it. Like it doesn't
Yeah.
have the kind of rewatchability that the Iron Man films do, or even the Thor films, which are a mixed
Mhm.
bag. The second one particularly, but like the first and third, I would rewatch anytime. Um,
Yeah.
I don't feel drawn to rewatching anything other than the Spider-Mans and Guardians 3, really.
Interesting. Yeah. I do think it's interesting while we're just in the world of film. I do think one of the things that has always been a problem with the Fantastic Four adaptations is how far they've strayed from kind of the comics. And
Yeah,
that is with for example, I think Galactus appeared as a big cloud in the Tim Story
basically.
films. Doctor Doom never looks anything like himself when he shows up. They always do some strange twist on him, and and the actual designs of the characters, especially Doctor Doom and Galactus, are some of their big strengths. So they
Yeah,
seem with
the
this
Kirby at his
film.
best.
Yeah, exactly. They seem with this film to be sticking much closer to kind of the classic Silver Age design, even setting it in the '60s, which I think is, the Fantastic Four has always kind of felt like a product of the '60s to me, and that's kind of where their designs come from. That's Jack Kirby. He's kind of a psychedelic kind of guy, the way he draws. So the '60s, '70s just works well, I think, for his stuff. So I don't know. I'm optimistic
Yeah.
about it, but yeah, let's talk a little bit, maybe just kind of about the background leading up to this, because it seems like this is a pretty monumental series of issues,
Yeah.
and I do think it dips into kind of the world of, which I don't know if they had explored this yet up to this point. I don't think so, but kind of the cosmic horror kind of genre. Whereas, much before, they've been facing villains, even like the Submariner, who's a fairly powerful villain, or Doctor Doom. They have terrestrial goals. They are Doctor Doom, when he first shows up, wants to steal jewels. It's kind of typical, kind of gangstery behavior, and Galactus is much beyond that. When he's much more, like they say, beyond good and evil. They'll kind of,
Well, I mean, and it does
yeah.
seem like Kirby has been wanting to push out on this for a while. So I have not read many of the issues between the early teens and this one. But I think of like the first appearance of the Watcher in issue, I'll say 13. Someone can
Mm-hmm.
correct me. They are going. It's sort of a space race to the moon against what's his name, the red ghost, the red something, but a Russian commie
Mm-hmm.
aeronaut, and that's when the Watcher sort of shows up. And there is, it seems like both he and to some extent Stan Lee have been wanting to do this kind of thing and have a bit more of this, right? I mean, even think of the issue we talked about last episode, in which Doom and Namor team up. They do end up in space, and
Mm-hmm.
some of those panels are cool, but they're nothing like the, as you say, psychedelic imagery
Mm-hmm.
around the Silver Surfer just exploring space in these
Yep.
issues.
Yeah. I think you're right in that this is certainly where Kirby's always kind of. I think for me, if I would identify Stan Lee, it's kind of the Spider-Man hero as the ordinary man who's a superhero. That to me is really where I think Stan Lee excels. And to me, with Jack Kirby, it's in this cosmic kind of world where his heart seems to be lie. Especially after he left Marvel, he would go on to create like the New Gods, which is very cosmic. It's very mythological. It's this whole universe of characters that I love. I think it's actually really fantastic. And it's much more with just like everyone's like a Galactus in some sense. They're all these huge, larger than life, mythical characters, and that seems to be where he excels.
Additionally, I think I'm speaking on the off the cuff here, but it seems like Lee, as you say, is sort of more interested in the Spider-Man type figure. I think he's more interested in the lone hero, and and Kirby seems to enjoy exploring teams. Not necessarily in the way that Lee does, right? Like Kirby, I don't think is as interested in the kind of characteristic Marvel squabbling that I sort of enjoy when it's well done. But he likes, I think, he being Kirby, to put together some visually very different characters. Whereas I think of Lee, right? Like, okay, he started Fantastic Four and wrote that for a million years. And he started X-Men and relatively quickly handed off writing duties, if memory serves, in a way that he never did with a lot of the other stories. And then he also started Avengers, and I don't remember how many of those he wrote. Whereas like I think figures like Spider-Man or early Thor were sort of more interesting to him. Lee. And part of that is probably that Lee is the writer, and so he wants to be getting into people's heads, whereas Kirby, as the artist, wants to have really flashy, astonishing images like we get sort of through this. And then I haven't read through Kirby's DC, was a Fourth World, New God stuff, but I've seen a lot of images, and that is sort of just really cool artistically. He seems to enjoy playing on a very big canvas in a way that Lee might do that, but it doesn't seem to excite him in the same way. Like, he really likes the drama of, high school, college, a doctor's office, whatever.
Yeah, I agree. Well, let's jump in to kind of the plot here, and we can kind of talk through some of the things we noticed. Because I mean, it's been how long have they been doing this, writing the Fantastic Four now? Has it been about 4 years, 5 years?
Yeah, it would have been something like that. Because I don't think it was every month for the first little while. I think it went monthly after some interesting kind of historical stuff. But it would have been, certainly probably at least 6 years, maybe slightly longer.
Yeah. Well, I'll jump in. So this is like we said, a 3-issue arc. And one of the things we note, you'll notice with this, if you read this, is it really begins wrapping up a plot line from a previous issue for the first half of this issue. And then it begins another plot line at the end. So it's really about 2 issues worth of plot.
And it's funny because those issues beforehand, I think, impact a few characters emotionally in these issues, but are not a part of the plot, right? So most notably, Johnny Storm has fallen head over heels for one of the Inhumans. We don't need to get into who the Inhumans are. And at the end of that storyline, the Inhumans all ended up trapped, and Johnny is heartbroken. And he's sort of dealing with that throughout the whole of this story. Additionally, it should be worth mentioning, just since for anybody who hasn't really read Fantastic Four much before, between our last episode and this episode, Ben Grimm has also fallen in love, but much less star-crossedly. He and Alicia, what's her last name? Masters? Have fallen in love. Ben, the Thing, terrifically ugly and monstrous. Alicia, crucially, blind. Very kind, very good heart. Blind, not interested in his looks, and so it actually becomes quite a nice relationship over the course of the series. But in any case, that's sort of 2 background pieces. But continuing as you were, Levi.
Yeah. So after the wrapping up of kind of the Inhuman story that we mentioned, the plot moves to the Silver Surfer. This is the first time we're seeing this character as he's soaring through the Andromeda Galaxy, earning attention of the Skrulls, who are other aliens that were introduced in very early on. They were in the collection we were reading from last time, but they're still around. And terrified, the Skrulls do everything they can to conceal their world from the Surfer's perceptions, explaining that an inexperienced Skrull, that wherever the Silver Surfer appears, his master Galactus cannot be far behind. I guess maybe before we get too much further into the plot, just a couple things I'd want to call out here. Just jumping, we've moved ahead 5 years in Lee and Kirby's storytelling with these characters and their drawing. Right away, things look much, no pun intended. The Thing specifically looks like the Thing now to me. And if you compare kind of side by side, his original design to the way he appears now, it's kind of subtle, but it looks so much better to me. I think I mentioned this in the last episode, but they've basically just given him eyes and a more expressive brow line. And he's streamlined a bit. And he just looks so much more appealing, in that design. And also the characters, I think for me, when you start reading this, the characters are way better. And, the Thing is no longer like this kind of anti-hero villain sort of figure. He's recognizably like the best friend, and, has a sense of humor, and, kind of a light touch with how he deals with stuff. But he also has compassion for Johnny, especially when Johnny's distraught, right? Like a big brother would, or a best friend.
And I think crucially with the Thing, in those early issues, he has a kind of there are some bits of humor from him, but he's more of a purely tragic figure, I think.
Right.
And at some point they figured out that it's actually much more enjoyable to read when all the characters like each other but have kind of failings and miscommunications and things, rather than one of them being weirdly resentful of the other for dating a pretty girl, and him just finding everybody else annoying. And I think crucially, the Thing now puts his sort of humor and mockery and violence towards the bad guys. And all these sort of comments that he has that are very characteristically the Thing, right, of sort of making references to where he comes from in Yancey Street. I think just really improves his character.
I agree. And I also think Sue is much less of a cipher as well. Like her and Reed's relationship, it's less like she has more to do. They've expanded her powers. Now she has kind of telekinesis, which is a pretty critical addition to her power set. She's not just turning invisible. She's less kind of just the wilting daisy of, oh, Reed, sort of thing. And she gets mad. There's more conflict, like a husband and wife between them. She wants him to stop working. He's working too much. She's mad that he's ignoring her. So they figured out the dynamics of the group. It seems like much better. Reed is settled into the father figure, calling Johnny lad, and stuff. So this is working better for me at this point.
Yeah, and also, right, Reed and Sue have gotten married, which I think really helps the Fantastic Four feel much more like a family. Because I think I think that the fact that they're not married in those early issues is kind of strange reading them as somebody who's read more later Fantastic Four, because I think of them both as a married couple and, spoilers, as parents. And so this is much more like the Sue that I know, but she's also, I think, she's a little more immature still, I think, than she will be, not just now, but even like a decade later than this. I think parenthood does mellow her out a bit and help her to kind of find more like constructive ways of developing her relationship with her husband. Because she comes off as a little bit in these issues. How would I put it? She's more concerned about date nights than saving the world a little bit. I mean, once it becomes really unequivocally clear that it's like end of the world territory, she gets a little more realistic,
Right.
but she just doesn't have any kind of trust in her husband's, like, albeit fanatical, uh, hyper focus on figuring this stuff out.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I do think all the characters have settled in much more to the people they'll be, and also into more of a team that you're excited to see working together.
Right. Exactly. There's a much better dynamic. That's fun to see how they work together. So continuing on with the story here. So they back on Earth, the Fantastic Four witness the entire skyline appearing to be engulfed in flame. It's a very apocalyptic scene happening. And then after the flames dissipate, suddenly there's space debris filling the sky, covering the sky. And then so you're like, what is going on? I was reading this, I wasn't clear what was going on. I was like, this is strange. As obviously panic in the streets, everyone's freaking out. They blame the Fantastic Four, as you do in a Marvel comic typically. But then the powerful being known as the Watcher appears inside of Reed's laboratory, and he explains that he's responsible for the atmospheric disturbances, that he's been attempting to conceal Earth's existence from the attention of the Silver Surfer. He further explains that the Surfer is the advanced scout of Galactus, a powerful cosmic being that consumes the elemental energies of the entire worlds, leaving them little more than dried, lifeless husks.
So we should talk a little bit about the Watcher here. Right. He's a very strange figure in Marvel Comics, who is introduced quite early on. Like I said, it's somewhere in the teens of Fantastic Four, and he's this like figure from this race that are from another universe, if memory serves, sort of doomed universe, and his whole shtick is that he just watches what's going on Earth, and he just watches, and he's never ever supposed to interfere. And this is always sort of funny to me, because pretty much whenever he appears in the comics, he's saying, "Oh, I don't interfere. I can't interfere. I could never interfere. I won't interfere," and then he's interfering.
Then he interferes. Yep.
Generally to help the heroes, but he is this sort of strange figure, and he's got a really kind of eerie appearance. He looks, frankly, like a giant baby, just like big weird head. He's like, I don't know, 20 feet tall, and he lives on the moon, at least to start out, and watches us. Yeah. Anyway, and so he's appeared a few times at this point in Fantastic Four and in some other Marvel comics. And he's a kind of shorthand for this is really serious.
Right.
But he also, like, I've never found him entirely effective because he does interfere so much. And he also, over the years, appears so many hundreds of times.
He shows up a ton in Marvel, just across the universe of their comics.
Yeah.
I think he's. You're right. It does seem like the Watcher rule is kind of more of like a suggestion than a clear rule. It's like a guideline. Don't interfere unless you have a good reason, and we'll leave that up to you what that is.
Or you feeling like it, or if it's Tuesday.
Exactly. Yeah. Because he definitely is very proactively interfering here. But it is a serious problem. He's trying to, like, the Skrulls were telegraphing this, like, you don't want Galactus to find your planet. And he's getting ahead of the problem here, trying to hide Earth from the Silver Surfer. But to no avail.
Silver Surfer is another figure we'll get into him more as we go through, but what do you think of Silver Surfer in these early issues as the sort of first appearance of this new character, riding a skateboard, seemingly like made of silver metal or something, and just fantastically strong? Yeah, what did you make of him?
So as a kid, I loved the Silver Surfer, and I loved him like the 90s, the way they would draw him in the 90s. Ron Lim specifically was an artist who I always thought drew the Silver Surfer so cool, really shiny with with lots of sparkles and lens flares and all this kind of stuff whenever he would show up. So I liked the look of the Silver Surfer quite a bit. And whenever he would show up, to me, it meant, oh, things are going to get, cosmic. It was like Infinity Gauntlet. He was always kind of in that cast of characters when the universe was about to end. He would show up in some sense. Here, I think I really like his design. It's interesting to me how little his design has changed over the years. I think there, not to be indelicate, but there's less of a bulge here than they added to, so he's a little less anatomically correct. But other than that, he's pretty much how you would expect him to show up. And I just think there's a reason he's a very simple but compelling design.
Yeah, while you were talking, I looked up some of the Ron Lim, and I remember Silver Surfer that way as a kid. I didn't really read his comics, but I would see them. Yeah, it is just I don't know. He's a strange figure, right? But he just draws attention to himself. Yeah, and I'm just sort of going through some of the pages. I love the way that Kirby has him. I mean, this sounds silly, but just being Surfer, like he looks like, if you were to imagine a masterful surfer who instead of surfing on water, surfed through space and through the air. And that's just such a cool image, particularly as a kid. Because it's very sort of simple to get. You see one image and you kind of get it. But yeah, I don't know.
I do think this is Kirby at his best character creation stuff, because I always love, because he really seems to have a knack for this, of taking something that seems silly, like someone on a surfboard going through space could be really dumb. But he kind of embraces the kookiness of it to some degree and just executes it so well that it becomes super cool. So there's almost like it's almost like he's really good at embracing the zaniness of comics in a way that I feel like other artists shy away from. Like they try to elevate it and make it serious, and especially when you get into his New God stuff, like it's like there's characters called Beautiful Dreamer and everything's like a pun, and it's like, it's so trippy, and like there's mother boxes and all this, just this weird stuff that to me works so much better than people coming up with these really pseudoscientific sounding names for everything and trying to make everything like uber serious. And I think his kind of world building is so good and just works so well for comics. And I think the Silver Surfer is just a fantastic example of that. Like, yeah, because when you step back, like a surfer in the universe, that's kind of goofy. It's like, but he doesn't shy away from it, and it works so well.
He makes it cool. I think just the confidence with which Kirby depicts him makes him this really sort of attractive character. And then Lee, I think this is when Lee and Kirby are really just working together perfectly, because Lee gives the surfer this sort of tortured interior life, as we'll come to see, that he's sort of becoming aware of himself. Later on, the Silver Surfer is actually going to be a huge bone of contention between Kirby and Lee. That's like a big part of why Kirby ends up leaving Marvel, because Kirby really wants to do stuff with the Silver Surfer, and then Lee is just like, oh, I'm going to do this, and I've completely changed his character in various ways, because I want him to be sort of a mouthpiece for my mid-century can we all get along philosophy, for better or worse. I'm not some people really like it, some people really hate it. I haven't read enough to have a very strong view of the matter, but I think at this point they're just working together sort of seamlessly. Just the end product is not clunky in the way that some of the earlier issues are, and not obviously produced with some tension like some later issues are.
Yeah. Yeah, this agreed. So, I mean, this issue wraps up with Surfer arrives, and we get our first glimpse on the last page of Galactus, having come despite the Watchers' attempts to hide Earth, which certainly means bad news. And interestingly enough, Galactus's first appearance is the wrong color palette. I don't know if it was in the same in your copy as, or at least not the color palette we've come to know him in. So Galactus is kind of purple and ruby, maybe as are the two main colors, but purple certainly is kind of the dominant color. And when he shows up, he's red and green in this page, only to be in the very next issue, he's to his normal color palette. So there's some inconsistent coloring happening here.
My guess is that Kirby or Lee saw this going out the door and said, "Oh no, this is the wrong coloring. He needs to be purple." Just because there often wasn't, I think, enough communication between colorists and artists at that time, and there was more in Marvel than a lot of places. But like when I think of Carl Barks, the coloring is just sometimes just sort of wildly off of what Barks really wanted, and he would sort of try to. Yeah. Anyway, coloring was much less of a science then. I'll put it that way.
Right. So it is a little bit strange when, like, if you're reading this for the first time and you're familiar with these characters, everything's been building up to Galactus, and he shows up and you're like, wait, that doesn't look right. I mean, that aside, though, I think it's another classic example of just how gifted Kirby is at designing these kind of cosmic, iconic characters. Because he looks fantastic. But there's a few notable little funny things. He has a G on his chest. That was later, I think, wisely removed, because it doesn't make a ton of sense as to why he would have a English letter on his chest for his name.
Yeah.
But
his
otherwise, I think it looks great.
Still, yeah, his design. Other than that, and I mean the G also, it's worse in the initial image, I think, just because of the coloring. It really looks bad in the red. Once you turn a couple pages and go to the proper purple and red Galactus, the G is not as bad. It's still one of the less good parts of his outfit. I also think his design in these first issues, it looks a little bit like he's wearing a mini skirt at times. It's just very sort of.
He seems to be taking his pants on and off, like he gets hot, because he appears with pants in this issue. Then the next issue, he's sans pants. He has no pants. And then in the third issue, the pants are back. So either
I think that's also a coloring issue.
It's my guess. It very well could be. There's certain things that look really like he's drawing him. And Galactus does not skip leg day, so good on him.
Actually, yeah, I think my guess is that he's not supposed to have pants on because of the way. I mean, I'm just looking at the third page of the second issue. The way that his legs are shaded, it looks like the outline of his muscles. So my guess is that it was a coloring issue of seeing that and coloring it with pants. Because when I turn to the first page of the third issue, like, he's wearing pants, but they're shaded like legs.
Yeah. So some coloring miscommunications definitely happening here with the art. Despite that, I think it gives him. I don't mind him in the miniskirt. I think it gives him kind of a Greek god look to it, which is pretty cool. It doesn't totally. It's just more odd when you've come to, again. This is not a style that Galactus carries forward into his subsequent appearances. So just looks like he was kind of hot today and needed to breathe.
And I do kind of like I like what they're going for with having his design be sort of reminiscent of a Greek god. I think that works really well. But rather, I think that idea works really well. I don't think the execution, it feels like it's just weird.
And I one of the things, aside from looking really fantastic, overall is a great design, and really Galactus he has this appearance of, and Kirby's really good at this. He looks sci-fi, but he also does look mythic. his clothes, his outfit kind of blends both technology and something that looks Grecian. It just has certain elements to it that work really well. So it has kind of a timeless feel to it.
And I think that's an idea that
And
Lee and
the
Kirby
way
both
Kirby will
like. I mean,
pose
think of Doctor
him
Doom,
is just
right?
kind of, oh, sorry, go
Oh,
ahead.
sorry. Oh, no, I was saying that, uh, and I think that's an idea that both Lee and Kirby really like. I mean, thinking back to Doctor Doom, right?
Mm-hmm.
His uh, character is a blending of great scientific intellect with magic.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the kind of a mixing of the space age with the primordial and mythic it's a really potent combination, and I think it's a combination that both of them really like.
Yeah. And I was going to say, I like the way they draw him is really effective to me too, in that he's always posed so indifferently to them. Like rarely does he have the kind of the Kirby typical action stance. He's much more just kind of standing there totally indifferent to their attempts to engage with him. This is showing kind of the subtleties of Kirby. He's not just he's very thoughtful with how he deploys his action and dynamism. Do you want to kind of talk more about this, the plot of this
Sure, yeah.
issue?
So from there, um, where did we leave off? Had he gone up to the back? Had Galactus had showed up and planning on consuming the world. So I guess we're right at the beginning of the second issue here. So the issue
Yeah.
has this iconic cover that everyone should look at, and has "If This Be Doomsday" as a title, which is just very attention grabbing. So the Watcher tries to appeal to Galactus to leave the Earth alone. Doesn't work. Uh, the Human Torch and the Thing, then seeing that diplomacy is not going to get them what they want, attempt to attack Galactus to no effect whatsoever. He is this stalwart, impenetrable force of nature, right? Much more than a being, he's a force of nature. The Watcher tells them that they should return to their base and recoup, and that he'll contact them soon. Galactus continues to assemble this planet devouring device. So the way that, as I understand it, the way that Galactus works is he devours planets, and he can do it just on his own, but most of the time he sets up a machine to more efficiently convert the matter of the planet into energy for him. So he's putting together this device. Meanwhile, the Watcher explains that there is something unimaginably far away in a different universe from Galactus's home planet that could stop Galactus. And so he and Johnny are going to go on this sort of quest on the side to find it. Meanwhile, Silver Surfer, who's been knocked unconscious, ends up in the apartment, very conveniently, of Ben Grimm's beloved Alicia Masters. She learns the Surfer's mission and appeals to him to turn against his master to save the Earth. And there are some rather touching sort of interactions between the two of them. So how did you like this sort of pairing of Alicia and Silver Surfer? Did you find it effective, or do you think it was a little nappy, or both?
A little bit of both, I'd say. I think this is kind of, I think the and we can get into this once we at the end here, but I find the justifications that they offer for why the Silver Surfer turns, and why the human race, why the Watcher is intervening at all, to be a little bit either underbaked. They're kind of just more assumed than really explored with a lot of depth. Because she gives a little speech, and the Silver Surfer is like, "At last, I know beauty," and that seems to be kind of all he needs to pivot and basically totally change his entire life's mission. So it was a little quick, but not terrible. I think it's from a high level, this works very well. The actual way it plays out is a little rushed to me. Yeah.
Yeah, I find it is a little. I think this trilogy would have been better if it were actually a full trilogy and not effectively the length of like 2 issues split up into 3. Because just a little bit more time fleshing out the Silver Surfer would have, I think, helped. That said, I find the Silver Surfer's sort of desire to help more believable than the Watcher's. The Watcher, I mean, I've said this before, but I just don't find him that effective a character, in a way that, like, it makes sense to me that if you've got a job that involves the death of untold billions of people as a day's work, and you never meet them,
right,
that then meeting one, and maybe I'm reading too much into it, but the beauty that he's talking about, right, is not just, oh, she's a beautiful woman, because what he says is, never have I heard such words, sensed such courage, or known strange feeling, this new emotion. There's a word some races use, a word I have never understood until now. At last I know beauty. And I think this is beauty in a kind of older, more philosophical register. Right, something more like the Greek word kalon that's often translated in ancient Greek texts alternatively as sort of noble or beautiful. There's this kind of holding together of goodness and beauty. Another example of something like this is, with older biblical translations, you'll see like happy the man, right? Rather than blessed the man, as happy being a sort of like depth of happiness that relates also to virtue. And I think there's something here with the beauty, right? That he has this sense of Alicia's depth of goodness, right? And I mean, explicitly invokes the virtue here, right? Courage of sort of speaking truth to power here. So I find that effective. It's quick, and it, I think, could have been fleshed out more, but I think that works. I think that's believable, that if you've been effectively employed by the most effective genocidal being in the universe for who knows how long, and then suddenly actually meet someone who's going to die because of it, and they're not horrible in any way and not sort of clearly undeserving of life, but a human being. You can understand that turn in a way that the Watcher is just
actually.
Okay, you've been watching us for a long time, and like you're connected with us the way that, like, when I watch a TV show, I get connected with the character. You know what I mean? Right. That one, I think I can't. But Silver Surfer, I find a little more.
Yeah, and maybe I hadn't really realized that this would be the first time he's meeting one of his victims, which does actually seem. I think you're right. Now, I don't know why I assumed that he would, because he comes down to the planet. I would assume he had met like all his victims beforehand. But from that perspective,
but the way he talks about her, it is more like she like it's really not in his job description to be interacting with the beings. It's more just show up, figure out, okay, is this planet the sort of thing that's gonna feed Galactus well, whether or not there's people on them. So I read this as basically his first encounter with a being on a planet that's going to be destroyed.
Yep. I think you're right, actually. And I think from that perspective, with that understanding, I think it does work pretty well. Even, kind of truncated, that it is. I think there is something there. Whatever the case, it certainly works because he makes the turn and quick.
So when the Fantastic Four begin attacking Galactus's almost completed device, the Planet Eater sends his cyborg Punisher, not to be confused with the later Vietnam War vet from Marvel of the same name, to keep them out of the way while he works on repairing the Planet Eater device. Making use of this distraction and delay, the Watcher boosts Johnny's powers so that he can travel to Galactus's planet and retrieve the weapon they need to defeat the World Devourer. And Alicia at this point sort of really convinces the Surfer to help save the Earth, like we were talking about. That's the end of this second issue. Do you want to take it from here with the third?
Sure. Yeah. So the Silver Surfer is now going to attack his former master, basically buying Johnny the time he needs to return from Galactus's planet with the weapon called the Ultimate Nullifier. And this is the weapon that seemed to show up in a lot of the comics I read. They always be talking about the Ultimate Nullifier. When Reed threatens to use it against Galactus, the Planet Eater agrees to spare the Earth and leave if Reed gives him back the weapon. True to his word, Galactus leaves, but not before making it so the Surfer can never leave the Earth by removing his space-time powers. After the battle, before the Silver Surfer can leave and come to know his sudden new home, Alicia thanks him for his help, causing the jealous Thing to think she's choosing the Surfer over him. He quietly walks away, feeling nothing but rejection, before Alicia has a chance to introduce him with pride. So a little bit of misunderstanding here. This comes up in other issues I've read too. There's always kind of a little bit of a jealousy, it seems like, thing between the Thing and the Silver Surfer over Alicia, kind of a love triangle happening. She seems to be loyal to the Thing, but maybe a bit too fawning over the Surfer whenever he shows up. So yeah, but I mean, so this effectively, this wraps up quickly. It's actually half an issue, and then you get into a whole different plot that we won't recap here. But what did you think of kind of the conclusion of our trilogy?
I liked it. I liked that both Johnny and the Surfer had important roles to play. The one thing that confused me, though, I don't know if you can illuminate this. The Watcher, as he and Johnny are traveling to find the Ultimate Nullifier, which is one of those things with a name so cartoony that it's so difficult to speak about with a totally serious tone of voice. As they're on their way, the Watcher finds out about the Surfer's intentions and says, like, oh no, this could, like, even in his good action here, he could actually make it worse and make it so that our plan can't work. And then maybe I missed it, but nothing really comes of that. And I wasn't totally clear on what
was that in the third issue or on the is that in the third issue where you're saying that, or
second? I thought it was the end of the second as part of the cliffhanger, but let's see if I can find it. Where is it?
Oh yeah, you're right. He says this means a new element has entered the great cosmic game of life and death, an element which may destroy my own carefully laid plan to defend mankind. Without meaning to, the Silver Surfer may himself be the cause of Earth's total destruction.
Yeah,
which
and I mean,
I don't know totally if this wrong.
Is generally the Watcher. Yeah, I don't know if this is just sort of generally the Watcher being very melodramatic, but it did seem. It seems strange that wasn't followed up on at all. But setting that aside, I thought that the sort of wrapping up of the plot worked well, right? Yeah. Because because Galactus doesn't want to cease to exist. He'd rather just deal with finding another planet to devour.
It is interesting because really striking.
Okay,
no, you go ahead. Sorry,
it's funny. Maybe not funny. It's striking to me that even as Galactus is this horror that could destroy an entire planet, and indeed has destroyed many, many planets in the past, he is fundamentally this man of his word, right? That he says, okay, give me the Ultimate Nullifier, and I will leave and not devour Earth. And the Watcher says, you can take this to the bank, give him the Ultimate Nullifier. He could no more lie than anything, and that I think is really effective. It's weird, but in a really effective way, to think that he really is meaningfully a force of nature. Yes, he looks like a man in a purple toga-y thing, but Galactus is this thing that exists sort of, supposedly beyond good and evil. I think, if we're to take that sort of claim seriously, I think we have to conceptualize it as like a bear, or some sort of
Mm-hmm.
wild animal. That just if a black bear comes really close to you, it's just going to kill you. Um, there's not a kind of uh, rational choice here, right? It's just an animal doing what the animal does. The animal doesn't have the capacity to be sort of culpable for his actions.
Right.
What's really strange
Yeah,
though
there's nothing
is that
sadistic in Galactus at all, right? There's no,
yeah,
yeah, he's hungry, right? And he's, this just like an animal, and force of nature is a term we've used often, but he doesn't ever get the um kind of sadistic laughing villainy that other um villains will show up. He's much more indifferent. And the only reason they're able to get out of this scrape is because they've presented him with a choice. He just wants to preserve himself, so he's going to move off. But it's not like he keeps his word. You can't expect him to lie. So there's a certain code that he operates by, that a villain, like just a typical villain, would lie. You would never give them the ultimate weapon.
yeah.
But Galactus, they say, yeah, you can. It's he honors his word.
Yeah, but what's strange to me, right, is with the example of a force of nature, right? Like a hurricane is not a rational being. A bear is not a
Mm-hmm.
rational being. The bear is not engaging in conversation with you first. Um, the hurricane, the tornado, the tsunami, the earthquake is not saying, okay, this is where it makes sense to quake, and oh, I actually shouldn't quake here, right? Like, and so
Yeah.
I think if I have a kind of higher level criticism, it is the idea of Galactus as this being sort of beyond good and evil. Um,
Hmm.
because actually the moral choice in that circumstance, right? If you're in the circumstance where you either murder innocents or die, right? You actually can't murder the innocents. You actually have to let yourself die. Um,
Hmm.
right? Like it doesn't, right? In a way that like, a bear, we can't say that for, right? Because a bear is not
Right.
capable of making choices, right? Whereas like there does seem to be for Galactus in this appearance and their appearances a rationality, right? An ability to
Mm-hmm.
understand circumstances, communicate, and reason, and then make choices. Um, so it actually seems like to me, Galactus is bad. He might also be honest, right? Like you can have
Right.
a kind of piece of virtue, right? You can have something that like, you can have something where you act like the virtuous man in one area while still like fundamentally being evil. Um, right? Like if Hitler never told a lie, like okay, he doesn't lie, but he's still trying to kill untold millions of people. Um, and so
Right.
I just like I take a bit of issue with
Yeah.
the characterization as beyond an evil.
Yeah, I agree. I think that would be my critique of this as well. I think there from a couple, one of the things that came up a lot, reading the quotes about them creating this, is they were saying, "Oh, these are kind of a biblical. I got my inspiration from the Bible." Um, but really, I think the values of this story are kind of fundamentally like secular humanist values. Um, it's trying to present like a universe that's indifferent, while at the same time kind of presupposing our inherent cosmic value and excusing like humanity deserves to live. Like Galactus will end in saying, you have the glint of glory within you and stuff, live up to it, that sort of thing, like a rallying cry of like, you have such potential, humanity, like do better, that sort of thing. Whereas I always think, to me, that's one of the things I like about like H.P. Lovecraft, for example, is his cosmic horror is way less pretense of what like a universe without God would be like. There's no sentimentality about the human spirit and a glint of glory. It's much more just like, hey, there are cosmic forces out there that are terrifying because they are so indifferent to us, and humans can't even comprehend them, right? Like Like, really, this is kind of trying to dip its toe into kind of cosmic horror a little bit, but really keeping its kind of progressive humanist kind of worldview. Um, and to me, it is weak because clearly, what does a glint of glory mean to Galactus? Like, he has some standard. Why is the Watcher so obsessed with, like, and he's like, oh, but the stumbling, bumbling, but always aspiring human race. It's a little bit like, okay. It's like they want to have these higher values, but also be beyond good and evil to me, and it doesn't really work.
Yeah, I think that is a bit of a tension within the Marvel universe at large. And I mean, sort of contemporary attempts at sort of justifying morality without claims to meaningful transcendence. Right. And I think Lee, I mean, though he himself was sort of non-practicing Jew, is living, I think he's taking his moral code from the kind of fumes of Christian civilization, in a way that I think we're much less so now, and so I think there was a fuller understanding of like what it means in everyday life to be a good and virtuous person. But at the same time, whenever he tried to articulate some kind of higher motivation for that goodness, right? Like there was a realization of a lot of the nuts and bolts of virtue, but without the ability to recognize its relationship to man's purpose, and its sort of source in God's design of us, and its sort of ultimate purpose in unification with God. And I think that is a tension within kind of science fiction generally, particularly those that wants to play with kind of ideas of gods and goddesses. Right. Even apart from like gritty 2000s deconstruction of religion stuff or whatever, Taika Waititi was trying to do with Thor 4 or anything like that. There is this sort of inherent, I don't know, at least to me, there's something sort of inherently unsatisfying about most kind of Marvel treatments of issues that like touch on transcendence and like the purpose of our existence.
I think to me, what I would say, is the way that, this would kind of present it. And I think it's commonly presented in Marvel is like, we're earning our place in like an indifferent universe, right? Where, we have the potential to be like one of the big boys in the universe, but I think much more and Lewis, I think, actually plays with this very well in his Space Trilogy, C.S. Lewis. But I would say that the biblical kind of or Christian view would be, we're exiled actually from the real order of the universe. We're kind of cut off from that, and we're being restored to that by grace and not by our own progress or potential. This is much more the progressive thing of like kind of assuming we all know what the good is, and it's not up to God to get us there, but it's up to us to progress there through our own whatever. As opposed to no, that the good comes from God, and we're cut off from that and being restored to that through grace. So I think it's a different understanding of just the universe to some degree, and one that is actually pretty inconsistent. When you actually try to play it out in this sense. Because I do think one of the advantages of like a Lovecraft universe is that like there's no pretense about the good. It is just horror. It's horrific, and it's much more powerful because there's way less sentimentality when you're dealing with it. Whereas Marvel, this kind of what's presented here is just like it's resting on sentiment, and there's not a lot to it's not very consistent when you really boil it.
Yeah. And I think, though, I think this would be a slight difference in the way that you and I would talk about it because of our sort of different theological traditions, right? So you coming from a Lutheran one and mine from a Catholic, because the way that a Catholic theologian would want to talk about it, right, is sort of in the fall, right, like we are meaningfully broken. We cannot pursue the good, and we can't like perceive, we can't experience God's grace, right, in the way that we could in Eden. But there's still a kind of like fundamental goodness to all being, right? Because of, right, like you can't have being without God, right? In one sense, even hell and the devil are good, right? Because they have being, despite the sort of total moral evil there. And so like so I would kind of articulate like Lee's intuitions here as, I mean, in some ways similar to the Silver Surfers in this issue, that like there's an experience of these good things, and these good things are ultimately possible only because of God's constant act of creation and because of God's unlimited goodness sort of freely overflowing out into the creation of this limited good world, and these broken and helpless, but in some meaningful sense, and sinful, but in some meaningful sense, like on a basic level, good human beings that we're encountering. That like there's still this kind of there's still this, I mean, right, there's the image of God that's sort of calling us back out, and almost makes the experience of God in a Platonic turn like it's sort of familiar. There's a kind of remembering there, because like, you know, we know our souls, and we know our souls only as these broken things. But like there's this kind of like, oh, this fits here, like this is where I come from, and this is what I'm supposed to be, even though I am sort of so broken. You know, so I think
I totally agree.
I
hear what you're saying. Yeah.
And I think like Lee always really identified with the Silver Surfer. And I think he's more like the Silver Surfer than he might realize, kind of philosophically and theologically speaking, in this issue particularly, because there is this, he's aware of something that he can't totally understand. I mean, I guess we all are in some way, but I think more so Lee than some. And
I totally agree. I think what you're describing is like really, it's kind of Augustinian probably view of the world, which, you know, I'm partial to for sure. I guess the thing that's missing to me is that like in this world, and obviously this is not no one's asking Marvel to be an Augustinian comic or anything like that, but there's such a sense in, I mean, it could be great, but there's a sense where the good is coming from God, right? He's the fountain and source of all goodness, right? And so there's when you start getting into I think the actual reality of the universe is that when you start, you know, the higher up you go, the more, you know, it's not like there's these indifferent beyond good and evil beings. You know, that's kind of more where we're at in the lower order of things in some sense, is that we have these notions that of beyond good and evil, but really it's not like it's a dualistic universe. It's that the more real things get, the more powerful things get, the gooder they become. So to me, it's just a little bit inconsistent, I think is maybe just where I'd say is that, to put it in more of an Augustinian framework, you know, this is not actually how I believe the universe is structured at all, you know, really.
Yeah. Right. Like, cause for the ancients and many of the early Christians, like to be more fully real, is to be in a very real sense better, and to be like further and further from the real. Right. You know, there's the classic kind of Aristotelian division of earthly living beings into, you know, the rational animal, us, which is the highest, and the animal, the brute animals, and then plants. And like as you, and below that you've got like dirt and elements and things. Um, and as you're getting sort of less being, you're less structured and you're less capable of goodness. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and right, and so as you get higher, right, like there's, when you think of like angelic beings, there's much more like being there than there is for a plant. Like a sunflower
Mm-hmm.
cannot be said to be this great paragon of moral goodness. Even though it does have a beauty, it does have something
Yeah.
wonderful, it does reflect God's goodness in various ways. I quite like sunflowers. Uh, you know, and with an angel, right? Like an angel is so good at its best that the fallen angels are so bad, right? It's only because it can be so good that it could be so
Mm-hmm.
bad. In the same way that like you can only have on Earth figures like Stalin and Mao and Hitler, like because we are the sort of being that can be elevated to be, a Saint Francis or a Mother Teresa. Right? It's
Right.
it's it's because we're gifted with this ability to be channels of grace and paragons of virtue. That like when that's really missing, it's horrible. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and as you get sort of to the purest, fullest being, like being and goodness are, in some very meaningful sense, uh, so interconnected as to be the same thing from approach from different vantage points. And so it's
Right.
like actually inconceivable for God, capital G God, to be anything but completely good and completely loving. Um,
Yeah.
Goodness itself, loveness itself, loveness, love itself. Um,
Yeah.
and I think that as you lose Christian metaphysics and then want to tell very exciting stories
Mm-hmm.
that reach out to the stars in the atomic age, you're necessarily, maybe not necessarily, but very often, you end up making these metaphysical claims that are, as you were saying, like ultimately destructive of the kind of moral claims that you want to hold in all the rest of your superhero stories.
Yeah. And I think that's why for me, I've always felt this tension a little bit with the Marvel universe because as opposed to say something like a Superman, which I think actually works, they lean into that much better, the inherent kind of goodness of Superman, especially like we talked about, in All-Star Superman, right? Like to be Superman is to be good. When Lex Luthor gets Superman's powers, all of a sudden he has like an epiphany on goodness, because it's not just, it's like you can't be Superman without being good. So I think kind of metaphysically that rings truer to me. Marvel seems to get much more with like the Infinity Gauntlet and all this kind of stuff into this idea of like, yeah, this beyond good and evil, these kind of godlike beings that, yeah, it's less consistent to me.
And I think that's part of
Yeah.
why the more street level characters tend to appeal to me more.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody, right, like somebody like Spider-Man. Yeah, occasionally he ends up on a spaceship or whatever. But like he really clearly is just some guy who
Yeah.
was given the chance to do good and is trying to and often failing. Like I
Right.
find that really compelling in a way that
Yeah.
the the cosmic level stuff from Marvel is more of a mixed bag, I think. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
I think the straight level, Daredevil too, which I mean can get sort of dark and intense, but I think has a similar sort of similar character of a broken human being wanting to do what good for others that he can. And I mean in Daredevil's case, right, explicitly kind of motivated in part by his faith and his struggles with faith.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah. Agreed.
yeah, and I think that's very powerful, and I think that the Marvel formula works really well for that. But
Yeah.
when you apply the kind of Marvel approach to like bickering and psychological difficulties and all these things, to an attempt to portray something godly, like something divine, it doesn't quite work. And even this is maybe I'm being sort of here, just a second. Sorry, just pulling out my copy of the Thor Ragnarok comic, um, because there's this crucial moment in it, um, in which we see, I think they're called the ones who sit above all, if memory serves.
Hmm.
They virtually never appeared in Marvel Comics. I think they have maybe like three appearances, and the kind of the actual theological universe of Marvel is kind of hard for me to keep track of, but they are, I think, kind of approaching them is in some ways much more like approaching God, sort of but like approaching God not as like someone to whom God has revealed himself,
Okay.
but as the pagan, reaching out in the dark, trying to find this ultimate source of power, and it's ultimately a sort of broken source of power. It's sort of like, it looks kind of, sorry, I'm just trying to find them here. Nope, that's not it. I should have pulled this up before. Well, I didn't know this conversation was going to go this direction, so I can't really blame myself. But they like look almost like a kind of like shadowy committee in the sky. If
Okay.
memory serves,
Yeah.
was why that I read this. And so there's almost this need to posit a kind of pagan relationship to the most divine things, right? Because when we talk about paganism, we tend to just think about the sort of polytheistic fighting god stuff. But in the more kind of developed, like philosophical forms, um, like those are kind of lower beings, those gods and goddesses, and there is a kind of unity above all, um, that is unknowable. And at times Marvel touches on this, but it is in a very kind of pagan register, and it is in a register that I think spends too much time thinking about power and not enough time thinking about goodness and also man's call to love. But we've now strayed fairly far from our initial discussion, but I think gotten into some good stuff that I'm sure we'll get into more in future episodes. But I should cut off the conversation because we're at close to an hour 20. Um, Final thoughts, Levi, on the Galactus trilogy in particular, and then also generally on Lee and Kirby's Fantastic Four as we move to one more episode on a later Fantastic Four author.
Yeah, I think this is by far the best that we've read so far from them on this. And so if you're wanting to get into it, I think this would be a good place to start. I would I would say that you're probably right that the street level Marvel stuff is more appealing to me as we get into this for reasons we've discussed. But still, this is really impressive, especially from an artistic standpoint for me. I think this is a lot of fun, and it was a very enjoyable.
And it's iconic. So if you're interested kind of in big important moments in Marvel history, you need to read this. I like Fantastic Four, but for me, my first sort of recommendation for somebody who hasn't really read any Silver Age is always going to be Spider-Man or maybe Thor, maybe Hulk if you're a certain kind of person. But my tendency is always going to be towards Spider-Man. I just think
Yep.
that's the real, even though that means not seeing Kirby's amazing art. So if you want to see Kirby stuff and get, though he also switches off duties with Don Heck and others at times. But yeah, I mean, Fantastic Four has a lot going for it. And I think this trilogy, as you said, would be a good first Fantastic Four comic to read. Because it has all these pieces working together really well. Despite the fact that Fantastic Four is not my favorite of the Silver Age. So next week we'll be turning to, as I indicated, some more recent comics that helped inspire the new Fantastic Four movie. It'll be the first, I forget if it's 5 or 6 issues of Jonathan Hickman's Fantastic Four from about a decade ago, which you can find relatively easily. It's in the complete collection or in the sort of slim trade paperbacks like I have here in a hardcover. But if you enjoyed this episode of Truth Beauty Comics, there are 3 things you can do to help support the podcast. The first is just to keep listening, and please tell your friends about us.
And the second is to review the podcast, giving it 5 stars whenever you listen to us.
And the last thing you can do is consider contributing to our Patreon with a monthly donation. For as little as $3 a month, you can get perks like access to exclusive episodes, voting on upcoming episodes, and even an original drawing from me. Or not from me, sorry. I was reading Levi's script from Levi. I am no artist. But most of all, if you help out with that, you can help make this podcast sustainable.
And that's the end of the episode. You can reach us at truthbeautycomics@gmail.com or on our social media accounts. Thanks for listening, and remember to take comics seriously and have fun while doing it.